This is All In. I'm Miriam Sobe. Today, we're learning about technologies and systems that have been increasingly prominent in the tech world, things like cryptocurrencies, blockchains, and NFTs that can be difficult to understand unless you take a really, really deep dive. So we'll spend the hour doing just that to find out how these technologies work, where they came from, and why some people think they're going to change the world. To help us through it, we're joined by Aniket Kate, an associate professor of computer science at Purdue University. Thank you so much for joining us, Aniket.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot to get into here. So I guess we'll start with the topic we mentioned that most people listening know something about or have heard something about by this point in time, which is cryptocurrencies. When did cryptocurrency first get started?
So the term cryptocurrency is fairly new. I would say that maybe the term started to get employed maybe 7 or 8 years ago in the form of Bitcoin as the prominent players over there. However, the concept of performing currency or payment operations via cryptography, via making sure that we have authenticity of those transactions is fairly old, maybe 90s, where it was initially thought as a helpful tool for banking environment in terms of the products such as digital cash.
What was the initial reason cryptocurrency was created? You said it was as far back as the 90s. I guess I'm wondering what purpose it served then and if it's changed to what it's being used for now.
We are getting surprised with all things. Indeed, in 90s, the idea there was, can we have an environment where we have currencies or we have payment mechanisms available which are complementary to the existing dollar transactions or euro transactions, where our accounts and our payments are not only just maintained on our banking system on a ledger, but in fact there could have a independent presence where another system keep track of all this information, and in some environment in a better privacy preserving manner, so that no one entity, one bank, or one environment can figure out who is performing transaction with whom. So privacy was indeed one of the main driver in early days. But when Bitcoin came in 2009 and actually got started in 2010 onwards, there it was actually came from a different angle, where the idea was that rather than having a single government or governing entity making decisions about how the money is spent and how it is created and distributed, can we have a decentralized or distributed control on that, so that anybody who wants to become part of the governance of a currency will be able to join and become part of the governance. So that was one of the basic idea behind Bitcoin was that. And as we make progress to now, there are all sort of different examples that are emerging, including even our own centralized banks all over the world themselves are also considering what are known as central bank digital currency initiative.
How would you explain this to folks who are listening that are wondering, like, what would Bitcoin or cryptocurrency do for them? How useful is it for them in their day-to-day lives?
So one of the key driver in the early days of aspects such as Bitcoin was that it allows one to perform transactions going beyond the geographical boundaries that were present in a manner so that it's not restricted by any sort of centralized agency that could have been present over there. Uh, the because it's a ledger that is maintained on the internet, in a way it could be simply looked at. If I can send an email to somebody, it's I'm not restricted by any means. By It's not that when I'm sending an email that I have to wait for a day or two for that email to reach there. It is instantaneous process. Or if I send a message, it can be instantaneous process. On other hand, with our existing payment infrastructure, the payments even across the borders or just within system itself can take a significant amount of time. And what Bitcoin and other environment initially offered was efficiency towards performing transactions, where your transaction time it takes to perform your transaction is no longer limited by geographical or other regulatory means.
So you can get something within seconds versus waiting days.
that was the aim, but there is also catch over here in that respect. Indeed, I can see the transaction. Let's say you paid me, that it is actually getting added to the system in seconds. But if you consider a system like Bitcoin, even to get the transaction get added to the ledger, it could easily take 10 minutes at least if the network is not congested, or even you may have to wait for longer, around up to an hour, to ensure that such a transaction indeed finish. But that's where majority of the innovation has been happening in last 7 to 8 years, where currencies beyond Bitcoin are trying to improve this latency to the level of seconds or even milliseconds these days.
Right. Yeah. There's just so many different types of cryptocurrency out there. I keep hearing about new ones getting started. And then sometimes there's fake ones that people get kind of sucked into without realizing. Before we get into some of that stuff, I'm curious, what is it about Bitcoin that has made it arguably the most prominent cryptocurrency out there?
Indeed. So the success of Bitcoin surprised many, and including myself. I remember myself as a graduate student doing my PhDs in this area of cryptography and distributed systems, and this paper came up from an unknown, actually a pseudonym, and whom we still do not know who the author is. And realizing that this is all good. We knew many of things already. Uh, the timing was kind of a right for Bitcoin. What helped Bitcoin in its earlier days was this idea that anybody who wants to become part of the governing a currency can join it. They can become so-called miners, if you heard this term, and and you can also then perform transactions in such environment. Essentially, there is no, your name never appears on such a ledger. You are only you are only represented there by what is known as an wallet address, which is basically something known as a public key from the cryptography terms, which is a public identifier for you, but you can create any number of such public identifier. So there was also inherent privacy aspect to that was used. Later, how I'll see that, and early 3 to 4 years, the idea was indeed, it was indeed more popular among the enthusiasts with this whole environment of digital currency. But uh, in spite of all the hiccups that Bitcoin saw in the early year, the technology and the underlying concepts found to be sound, and that actually got more people interested into such environment where it offers a nice alternative or a complementary technology to all the things that we are performing today. And many people look today as that as a sound investment, and that got started maybe from 2015 onwards. People also observe that the same technology can be employed beyond finances, to supply chain, to track, and all other applications, and that gave even further boost. So that's how I will say the journey started. Initially it was privacy and the independence of the governance, but later the stability of the technology is what attracted people.
You mentioned the privacy, and I don't know. I guess I had a misconception. I thought using cryptocurrency would be more transparent. So is the use of privacy a concern for some, that some bad actors might be using cryptocurrency to do things?
So I would like to answer this question two ways, because it's a very interesting question. And I use the term initially for privacy for Bitcoin. In fact, as it turns out now, it is considered that if you're using something like Bitcoin, then your privacy is even weaker than our current environment that where we use the current our banking systems, because the ledger is transparent and available to everybody to observe. And there are all sort of linking attacks that have been thought through, so that we can figure out which transactions coming from which ID. And then eventually, when you connect the ID in the Bitcoin world or blockchain world to an identifier, let's say outside a blockchain world in our environment through exchanges where we, let's say, convert dollar to Bitcoin, and that link can be employed now to establish all the transactions that you perform in Bitcoin kind of environment. And there are already firms which actually expertise, and they are active for several years now to dealing with this privacy, basically attacking the privacy on the Bitcoin kind of environment. At the same time, there are newer currencies that came up where the aim was to improve the privacy in such an environment so that privacy continue to remain available to the level of our current centralized banking environment, or probably even better than that in some instances. On other hand, when you talk about the issue of that privacy being used as a hiding place for illegal activities, it's certainly has been a small concern with this environment, but I find that many times it's overhyped, in the sense that even with our current centralized environment, all sort of money laundries and other issues and tax evasion have been equally effective and active. uh, when we look at the digital currency, it's another instrument with its own nice features and not so nice features, and in general, it has issues. But so far, we have observed that all the regulation agencies has been successful to figure out issues when it comes to the money laundering and other irregularities that typically happens in such environment.
I just remember hearing a lot about different companies that get hacked, and then those bad actors will say things like, "We need to be paid in Bitcoin if you want your files back."
Yes, so that certainly is something do happens for the ransomware attacks, where your system get hacked, and then they ask you for making payment in Bitcoin. As it turns out, even there are examples where the money got recovered from such environment, because if they use Bitcoin as the example, we precisely know the how where money is going, which address it is going to, and how it is making let's say transfer in the Bitcoin environment itself. And once you see an exit point, you precisely know where it's going. So they use it, but I don't think that's always going to be the case that that remains their preferred means. So at the same time, I will say that even before or even without Bitcoin, with the standard currencies, such ransomware attacks could be performed, where now they may try to just tell you to perform transaction in a currency, in a foreign currency, and that could be much more a complex issue for an organization to deal with.
Well, we'll be back in 90 seconds. I'm Miriam Sobe, and this is All In. This is All In. I'm Miriam Sobe. Today, we're spending the hour with a computer science expert to help us understand rapidly changing technologies you've probably heard about, like blockchains, NFTs, and cryptocurrencies. We're joined by Aniket Kate, an associate professor of computer science at Purdue University. So, Aniket, we've focused so far on cryptocurrencies, and I want to move on to a different but related topic. Can you tell us what blockchain is? Now, for those who have never heard of this before, what is the simplest understanding for this?
So the term blockchain emerged with the cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin itself, but actually the meaning of blockchain is actually in its name itself. So it's a chain of block, and when we say talk about these blocks, these are the blocks of the transactions. And what's the purpose of a blockchain is to offer a immutable, um, to say more precisely, an append only ledger of the transactions. Those transactions can be for payments, such as creating currency, transferring it, or destroying it. That's what happened in cryptocurrencies. But it doesn't has to be those. It could be all sort of asset. It could be your entities in supply chain, or diamonds as they flow from one part of the world to other parts. So it basically offers a shared ledger, which allows us to keep track of the assets or commodity as they move from hands to hands.
Okay, interesting. So it's a shared ledger that anybody could look at for anybody's business, or is there any privacy with it?
That depend upon, so there are concept called what we can call as public blockchains. So most of the cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these examples, they fall in what we can call as public blockchains, where they want public scrutiny so that people can see that they're functioning correctly, and then they will have more participation because of that. On the other hand, when we look at the applications of blockchain in more industrial or consortium environment, they may not want such public scrutiny, and we call them as more like consortium blockchains. And there are all sort of different privacy that can exist. The first thing is, obviously, when we are in this consortium environment, we do not want a people beyond these consortiums to be aware of the transaction that's happening there. So in that sense, we do not they are not public for whatsoever. But privacy there could be also interesting, where we may say that we allow consortium across different companies or organizations, and we want to make sure even there is some kind of a privacy, so that one organization cannot scoop on the trade secrets and practices by another organization. Just to give an example to show what I may want is, I may want to make sure that I buy some product from a retailer at a particular time based on my need for my organization, and I may not want my competing organization or that retailer to figure out some aspect of my practices so that they can possibly create a more challenging environment for me.
Interesting. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of this. I guess what I'm wondering is, um, there are people that are really excited about the promise of blockchains. What is it that makes folks interested in this technology?
So one of the key aspects that blockchain came in, I did not put that in the word blockchain itself, but it's somehow inherently associated with it, is a decentralization or distribution. So inherently, blockchains are considered almost for everything, but their applicability actually is related for inherently distributed environment, where there are multiple entities who simultaneously want to perform similar tasks, and they want to make sure that those tasks get performed in a manner so that no single entity can actually decide and make significant changes, so that all of a sudden there's a huge effect of those changes on them. And maybe an example for this could be, let's say, Uber or Lyft kind of environment. And currently, let's say those systems are completely centralized. There is one company who manages all that. But let's say we have an environment available where we can keep track of all this information without having a central entity, so that the rules and execution of rule and things are done in a completely transparent manner, following the set of rule. And as long as a majority or super majority of the players in the system continue to function correctly, that we indeed able to say that there is no single party who is just making decisions which could affect everybody. And that was, for me, was one of the key driver behind the early interest into such an environment. These days, it's quite a lot more where people see others getting excited into that, they are also getting excited into these technologies. And there are certainly examples where it is doing really well, but there are examples such as supply chain, where there are multiple entities which come together. We're still in nascency in terms of how effective that could be.
It sounds to me, though, I mean, when you're talking about centralized and decentralized, these sound like some big words that would put people on alert. Like, why would I want to be on something that's decentralized, where it could be like the Wild West and people are just making up whatever they want?
Yes. So, and this is certainly an important question to be considered. So there are also different way of decentralization. The one aspect for decentralization is that we already know what's the precise premise of the decentralization. Let's say there are 10 well-defined entities, and my premise is that as long as these 10 well-defined entities, who you know their place, you know their place on the internet as well as possibly physical place, and you know that as long as, let's say, six of them continue to function correctly, that such a system will continue to function correctly, that can offer you much more confidence into the system than just indeed Wild West. I've come to Wild West, and indeed, if you consider in that respect the Bitcoin or Ethereum environment, where indeed anybody can join such environment, it's more the history that we see these systems functioning correctly without any irregularities, basically following the law as they define into those contract and those systems for tens of years, and that gives people confidence that indeed these systems are working out as they're supposed to.
Who would you say is key right now in the blockchain world, or who are the main players using blockchain?
So if you look at the blockchain in general, I'll say there are multiple players. So finances continue to remain, and people all over the world are considering uh, blockchains and in particular cryptocurrencies as a investment mechanism, or in several examples as a trading mechanism. And you, we, people might have heard that Ecuador, for example, indeed considered Bitcoin as an alternative currency, because this certainly is probably, at least in some environment in the over the world, it may be certainly more stable than what they have locally. On other hand, beyond finances, and people all over the world also look at that as a good investment, to some extent similar to the gold. Beyond finances as well, all prominent supply chain players, I mean, you name it, Walmart, Kroger, are already considering those for their supply chain issues, and where the key term there is the agility. I mean, we talk about all these issues that can happen with supply chain, figuring out the challenge there, or figuring out the why a particular process is slow could be much easier if we have a more transparent record that goes across different industries and different players. And that certainly is attractive, where in supply chain environment, blockchain can actually allow us to make tracing of incorrect behaviors or tracing inefficiencies much faster than our current the completely distributed ledgers that we have. Third thing I want to add here, which is recent but also going really fast all over the world, is that even the countries or the nation government themselves find these digital currency aspect where to be interesting, so that they can offer their citizens opportunity to perform transaction just from their mobile devices and phone. And these central bank digital currency initiatives is also something which is gaining prominence all over the world, including here in USA.
I want to go back a little bit to what you mentioned with the supply chain issues and how blockchain can be helpful for that. I'm just trying to visualize how this works. So, are you saying that if somebody uses blockchain for supply chain issues, um, they'll be able to see step by step, like let's say a product is going from one part of the world to the other, everything that's happening along the way?
Indeed. So this is really interesting. And let me take an example. Let's say I'm buying something which says this is organic. And currently, I have to trust that, okay, it says in organic, so probably somebody checked that and and verify that this is indeed organic. But let's say I have a technology available where I look at a code or barcode that's available on that particular product, and I scan that with my phone, and it precisely tells me in what step it came. Like it started from, let's say, this particular farm in Ohio, and then it got processed in somewhere in India, and so on and so on, and it eventually reached me. That can indeed offer me more confidence into indeed what I'm buying into. uh, at the same time, let's say there is some kind of outbreak, such as we have many times with the fresh products like lettuce. And in that example, many times when we get all uh, those questions that, okay, so they are recalling some of the products, and many times what they do is that to make sure that they there's no issue that emerge from people using those products, they make a much bigger recalls. But using blockchains, we could make sure that we can precisely find out where the outbreak is and reduce the recall to only entities where it matters. Where, let's say, I bought something, it's in my refrigerator, and I see that there is a recall, and if I can scan that particular barcode and realize that, there's no problem with this. We don't need to go back and give it to it. Can give you much more confidence.
Oh,
I
that's
want
so
to,
interesting.
yeah, I want to emphasize this aspect here that for sure we can do it today. What blockchain offers is the efficiency and speed with that, and especially with the first product, that means it will reduce into the less wastage of those products. And that's the reason this certainly an area where we can do much more interesting. But I want to add a caveat there that is essentially important to mention is that especially with the supply chain environment, we are kind of connecting the physical world to the digital world. I mean, the physical products to the digital world. And there is always a unique challenge in terms of creating identities where I take up this particular commodity and I want to somehow create some kind of a identifier for this commodity in my blockchain or in my ledger. And this process is always the challenging process. We can call it the last mile process because we want to make sure that these identities are unique, and it and we want to make sure that when product we combine multiple products and bring them together to make something bigger, that those identities are somehow preserved, at least in some environment. And that's always the challenge in such environment. So we have to have some kind of a trust there present when we link the physical goods to their digital identities.
Is there a way for blockchain to be used for other things? I'm just thinking right now, contact tracing in the pandemic.
There could be some advantage, but I don't see precisely there. If you look at the contact tracing problem from that perspective, somebody might have thought of something, but at least I do not find that to be that effective, because it's certainly in many environments we manage to that just with our Bluetooths and exchanging information as we come next to each other. So I'm pretty sure somebody thought about using blockchain for contact tracing, but I do not find that to be a much useful place.
And I think that's why you're the computer scientist and I'm not. So another thing I was curious about is whether blockchains are something that is just the new big thing, and if this is where it starts and stops, or is this a technology that is too important to go away?
By now, it is certainly sure that it's too important to go away. Indeed, even when I'll say 5 years ago, by that time I was already much excited and working in this space. There were a lot of people who could easily doubt it. But blockchain technology has proven that it is stable, and we indeed have much good internet available all over the world for using that, and the properties and advantage that it offer will continue to serve us better. And I can certainly say that the cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, with all the regulations and whatsoever, may have issues and may or may not survive to like tens of years. But the concepts of blockchain and its applicability to the finance and supply chain and elsewhere will continue to maintain. And it's certainly we can say that it's here to stay.
Well, before we head to a break, we have a few minutes here. Why do you think it's important, or is it important for people who aren't in the tech industry to understand these concepts?
So there are many interesting examples that are building up. It has proven that it could become a nice place for investment if you are doing that in a secure fashion. At the same time, it can offer agility and mean. Let's say there is a business, they could very well easily come across people saying that, can I pay you in a particular cryptocurrency? Because that's what something offered to me. Or there could be their retailers in some other country may prefer a payment in a particular currency, which could be backed, by the way, by the central currency. Their concept like stable coins, which is precisely offer so that we do not have these inflexibility of the too much volatility that we typically associate with the cryptocurrency prices. So there are certainly much more significant efficiencies and agilities that these currencies can bring to the businesses as well as to the individual. And that's the reason it's certainly interesting. we'll be also talking about NFTs, and if you're an artist, there could be interesting aspect from the blockchain that you could be interested into understanding and knowing about that, and that certainly could also bring you into the system where you may have much bigger audience to your environment if you're willing to consider your important digital arts into this into the space, and you and basically doing business with basically anybody in the world.
Well, we'll be back after a quick break. Today, we're learning about cryptocurrencies, blockchains, NFTs, and other new technologies with computer science professor from Purdue. If you have any questions or comments, you can always reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter at All in Indiana, or you can leave us a voicemail at 866-476-3881. That's 866-476-3881. I'm Miriam Sobe. We'll be back in 90 seconds. This is All In. This is All In. I'm Miriam Sobe. Back now to our discussion on some of the big promises made around new technologies like cryptocurrencies and blockchains and how these systems might impact us in the years ahead. We're joined again by Aniket Kate, an associate professor of computer science at Purdue University. Aniket, we've mostly talked so far about different definitions of cryptocurrencies and blockchains and some of the ways that they can be used in these technologies. I'm curious to know more about their impact and the worries some people have about them. How much of an impact do you think cryptocurrency has had so far on our society?
So it's certainly not a huge so far, but it's already significant. So far, mostly the utility of cryptocurrencies and blockchain is restricted to the financial world. But over the years, we are indeed going to see that is affecting the supply chain world that we talk about, as well as to other, I'll say, more inherently decentralized processes. So rather than having single Uber, why not we have a ledger taking care of all the transactions that are necessary for such Uber kind of an environment? Could be interesting initiative. Or there could be, when we look at all the, let's say, insurance business, that's also one of the interesting example, that why there should be one centralized entity doing that, because inherently it's a process that we can write down as a contract or a algorithm, step-by-step algorithm, and that can be executed on a fashion so that we don't have a central entity taking care of it. If there is a task which inherently requires a central entity, we should have it. But if not, there is really no need to add such central entities. And if we can replace those central entities in all the slowness that they bring, or all the unnecessarily control that they bring, there are certainly applications beyond plain supply chain and finance where I see this is going to succeed.
Can you give us again an explanation of like why a central entity wouldn't be needed? I'm just trying to understand this also for myself. Is that you mentioned like for insurance, would that be instead of using a system, maybe a software system that the company is using, they use blockchain instead?
So really, and maybe insurance is a good example in that respect, right? So let's say all the rules for insurance are already well known, and we have an algorithm in place to understand how the insurance should be calculated. Okay, once we have available that, so blockchain is it's a basically a chain of transactions, but those transactions are not necessarily just you pay to somebody. It could be anything that you want to perform with money or without money. So it could be a transaction for generating an insurance, or subscribing to insurance, or filing claims, or whatsoever. So if we can define this complete process in an automated fashion, that there is no need to have such centralized middle entity, which actually not only make the process inefficient possibly, but also make it less cheap, right? Because they bring their own interest and they get paid for that. So if we remove the middleman in an environment where the payer and payee can just perform transaction by themselves, there's certainly advantages that we bring where the whole process gets cheaper.
Okay, well, I'm going to think of an example here that I don't know if this is relevant. Is it
Yeah.
like saying in the past, everything was paper and pencil and files, and now we have online records?
And I'm going. We have online record, but we still have the this one entity which creates online record. But if that entity's task can be completely automated, then we can also remove this entity. And what blockchain offers is to perform a task of this entity in automated fashion, but with a fault tolerant guarantee that as long as, let's say, I have 10 entities simultaneously perform this task, six of them perform this correctly, I know that the correct transaction will happen. I can always take this program and put that on a computer and run it. But then if that computer fail, then multiple things can happen. Either incorrect transaction happens or no transaction happens. But if I replace that one computer by 10 computers and assume that now as long as six of them continue to function correctly, that my process will be complete. That's a distributed guarantee that blockchain brings to the system.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. When it comes to cryptocurrency, I do want to talk about that a little bit more real quick. Is there anything people should be concerned about? I mean, I mentioned briefly at the top of the show just that there's scams of cryptocurrency that people sometimes fall into.
So there are a lot of things to concern about and be aware of. The one of the key thing is the usability of the system is still improving, but it is essentially different from what we are used to. Today, if I want to log into my bank or any system, I have a username and a password. If I forgot my password, I just have a button available to forgot password. It will ask me some question or some other mechanism or send me an email and I can recover my password or change my password. Okay, and we are used to that, and although it has its own issues, but at least it is stable by now and we continue to use that for several years. In a pure blockchain environment, if I forget my private key associated with my address, then nobody can help me to recover it at a core level. And it's an important thing to understand that we have to indeed be better at maintaining this information. The solutions some come have come some have come up is have what are known as the other wallet services, where you use your typical password, username and password kind of credential to log in, and they take care of all your transactions. And that certainly is a thriving and a very big business, but that certainly goes slightly beyond uh, the typical expectation that one have from such decentral or distributed entities. I mean, we have something which is distributed, but we are using a single point of entry to connect to it. But as a starting point, they could still be very good uh, way to gain if you do not have the knowledge in the computer science field in terms of how to maintain these things better. So those kind of a wallet services could be good starting point, and eventually once you get more acquired, you can again move to away from them and have complete control over your transaction. So usability of the system is certainly important. It's also important to understand issues that can happen, and I want to give a fun example what you know as front running. So let's say there is an interesting financial instrument that is created on a blockchain, and I, using my knowledge, I'm going to perform a transaction. And let's say these validator nodes, which are actually going to execute this transaction onto this blockchain environment, look at this transaction. They figure out that by adding their own transaction, more like an insider job, they can gain money through it. And this has indeed happening in many such systems, which is known as front running, which basically not stop your transactions, but indeed can reduce the benefit that you gain that you could have otherwise got by if such front running transaction wouldn't have been present, and the you may even get some loss in such environment. So that's a interesting example that I can think. And the final one I want to add there is more associated with the patching any bugs. So we are all used to seeing uh, those the stickers or those note on our on our screen saying that, oh, the system need to be updated, there is security update, or there is kind of a new version that is coming up that you should install on your system. On a normal system, it's always encouraged, and I'll encourage everybody, you should accept the security updates as soon as you get it, because otherwise your computer could be vulnerable. uh, but they're peculiarly challenging in blockchain world, because let's say I'm running a blockchain system, and we realize there is a bug there that could be exploited.
Mm.
Let's say I create a patch for that and I put on the system. Now all of a sudden somebody might be keeping tracking of that that patch that I put, and realize that this is the bug. So they may really quickly launch an attack which can be sweeping across a huge user space because of that. And there are all sort of very interesting things that many of the blockchain projects already did, where in terms of hiding this important patch along with some other small tiny patch, where they say that, oh, we are going to update this very superficial feature, but in fact along with that they actually updated something more even significant. And they really opened it. They, after 5 days, when they realized majority of players are already went with the patch, they said that, hey, this was something that we did in terms of patching, and it was a major bug, we realized, and we fix it this way. But you see, it's a because there is inherently immediate monetary impact involved here. Patching is a very challenging process in general.
Before we wrap up, I do want to touch upon NFTs or non fungible tokens. And I think there's a lot of confusion around what this is. We've heard of artists and celebrities who are selling things, like a digital picture for millions of dollars. What are NFTs?
So, as you say, NFT or non-fungible tokens, it means that it has a uniqueness to it. So, in principle, if you look at a bank currency note, uh, it's it's quite fungible in the sense that I can replace a $10 note with another $10 note. uh, it could be situation that maybe somebody's keeping track of some identifiers and say that I don't accept that particular node, something like that. But essentially, in most environment, we say they are perfectly fungible. If you look at cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, they are so less fungible, but still bit more. I mean, one Bitcoin could be looked at equal to other Bitcoin. But you may be in situation where you say that, no, seems like this Bitcoin is coming from the money laundering world, so I'm not going to accept it. So it is certainly less fungible than the cash, but it is still fungible. NFTs are essentially unique entities, which in principle there should not be anything else like that. And that's the reason there is a value now, that somebody may really like to own something. But because we are in the digital world, that means that and we know that in digital world everything can be copied. So that's the reason a lot of confusion can indeed come, that what does it even mean to own something in a public world. Let me first give an example where it actually means something, and where it has been effective and used quite a lot, and that's in the gaming world, the online gaming world. I could own a particular avatar which somebody created, and I have an NFT on that, and I own it, and the gaming environment can make sure that I am indeed shown as a owner. Somebody else may still copy that and put on their website, but in the gaming world, they are not certainly owner to it. So that's the reason in gaming world, indeed, these different arts, when they use NFT, has been a hit and has been very successful and is a meaningful. Beyond, but if you consider in general public, there are already lot, as you mentioned, many celebrities and many other people buying NFTs, and there the value of NFT is yet to be completely determined. It's very speculative, and it is also depend on any environment. I mean, let's say one issue could be that I created an art, which is, let's say, physical art, and maybe I put that somewhere on my page, but I haven't yet registered that on the NFT service. Somebody else come along and just took that and sell it as if they created it. They may still use my name, but they may try to sell it by themselves. And it's a
Mhm.
huge challenge where some artists have already realized that somebody else is actually taking their arts and trying to sell that on different NFT market. It's a very interesting and challenging issue. So in some sense, maybe the artists want to make sure that they at least have a presence in such environment to keep track of if some of their digital art possibly just does not appear there, because they may at least ask for them to them to be taken down and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that because I was thinking, isn't there copyright issues? Like if somebody can just take anything and make an NFT out of it, and there's nobody putting any rules.
Yes, so and this is indeed the regulation there in the public world. It's interesting, and it becomes more challenging because uh, the copyright enforcement may not work there, because this other person who is basically stealing your art or trying to make money out of your art, it may not be in the jurisdiction where we can apply copyright effectively, or we may not be able to figure out immediately their identity. So there are indeed issues to relate it to that. What we may try to do is, and that's remain vigilant, and if we are into the digital art, that actually create IDs in such environment and keep track if some of the things that we are doing are not getting somehow stolen. The one thing is that if you are an artist and something, a big transaction happen on your name, you may be able to figure it out, but the ship might have already sailed there if money has already transferred, right? So that's the reason it's important to be vigilant in this space in general. When it's come to actually having physical art and making a digital version of that and putting that on NFT, it's also even weird that what does it even mean to own these things, right? So it's indeed a very fluid situation, but certainly in the gaming world, I see a clear example because it's a closed system. I see a clear advantage and example, and it is doing really well over there.
Well, we have about a minute and a half left. What are you looking forward to from everything we've talked about in the coming months and years ahead?
So one of the thing I want to mention from the financial world, if you look at the whole cryptocurrency space, a majority of them, it is very much on what we can call as the cash or currency, which is basically only part of what we do. Most of us, for all our transaction, use credit card, and this loan or credit environment is not yet seen its perfect form or a good form in this blockchain world. So this concept called credit network, which excites me a lot, and I think there is a huge initiative there to go beyond just the plain transactions or transaction with the cash. So current world could be look at more like a cash transactions or bank transaction or a debit card, but indeed, there is a lot more we can do with this whole credit network environment, where we can basically create more like a credit kind of instrument or loaning kind of instrument, which I'm excited to see. I'm also hoping to have better privacy in this environment, because because it can very well happen that because people are still getting used to it, somehow I do not have a perfect knowledge for that, but I still owe a significant amount of money, uh, because people can figure out my IP address, basically my location on the internet. They may try to go after me and try to steal money from me by going off using different vulnerabilities. So that's the reason we need better privacy, and we need better wallets and better protection for our money in such environment. And it is going to take some time, but and we are making some steps toward that. But indeed, that's certainly the concern for me as I see it.
All right. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Miriam Sobe. Thanks for listening.